the bodies of people being fed to these dogs and dog eating them and sitting, being frightened, knowing that if they see me, they will, bite me. I think I was so terrified.
On April 7th, 1994, a 100-day massacre began. When Rwanda's president, Juvenal Habyarimana, was assassinated by a missile destroying his plane, the tribal tensions between the Hutu and Tutsi broke. The Hutu and Tutsi had been fighting for power in Rwanda since Belgium had seized Rwanda and imposed race cards and ethnic segregation in the early 1900s. Belgium settlers favored the Tutsi over the Hutu because the Tutsi conformed better to European beauty ideals. The prevalence of eugenics caused this difference in appearance to be associated with a difference in intellect as well as worth. The tribalism that had once been uniquely Belgium's perspective also started to build resentment between the two groups. The formerly peaceful groups began to fight for power within the government, and when President Habyarimana was assassinated, it was dominated by Hutu. These Hutu used the assassination as the spark that was needed to turn the rest of the Hutu against the Tutsi. Thousands of Hutu were encouraged to murder their Tutsi neighbors, friends, and anyone else they could find. Propaganda was heavily utilized for this cause, with both radio and newspapers being used to dehumanize the Tutsi. Radio stations first used the word cockroach to refer to Tutsi people, and the popular magazine Kingura published the Hutu 10 Commandments, urging Hutu people to kill and look down on the Tutsi. The Tutsi did their best to escape the Hutu, however, tens of thousands were brutally murdered. When Hutu people tried to resist killing their fellow citizens, the government told them their families would be killed in the same way the Tutsis had died. Hutu were encouraged to leave the bodies of their victims in piles by the road, both as a reminder to hesitant Hutu of what would happen if they did not join in the massacre, and as a threat to the Tutsi. This was also the first time rape was used as a tool in genocide. The genocide took place at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and the disease, which was already widespread throughout the region, was deliberately inflicted on Tutsi women by Hutu men. Hutu men who were positive with the HIV virus were put into groups called rape squads, and were ordered to cause what was considered to be one of the worst deaths, death through AIDS. Up to 500,000 women were raped over the 100 days of the genocide, and the staggering rates of death due to these rapes continued for years. The Tutsi were forced to flee from their homes out of fear that they would be murdered or brutalized by their neighbors. They hid anywhere they could go, some fleeing the country, some fleeing to the United Nations embassies, and many hiding in holes and under houses.
I told him my father asked me to come here because things are getting really bad in our village. And he took me and said, come.
He put Immaculée and 6 other women in a tiny, rarely used bathroom in a remote corner of the house, hidden not only from intruders, but from the minister's large family. They showed us how they did it. Immaculée and the other tall women sat with their backs against the wall. They pulled the smaller girls down on top of them. They couldn't all move at the same time.
So when he took us in the bathroom, I was like, oh my God, I will be saved here. This bathroom is so hidden that we're going to be saved.
You thought this is my salvation?
Really,
You didn't think, how are we all going to fit in there?
No, that was another question. I was trying to fit in any hole I can, just to hide.
Despite the warnings and pleas for help from Tutsi and peaceful Hutu, which the UN received months before the genocide, they refused to pay heed to them. These warnings were continuously ignored even when the UN received warnings from their own representatives in Rwanda, not just the common Tutsi citizens. UN officials in New York responded to these warnings by forbidding UNIMIR to act.
And within hours, the answer comes back from New York.
I think that's the answer.
And there's the answer. You are beyond your mandate. We cannot agree to the operation contemplated in paragraph 7, which is the recovery of the arms. And this is where we realize now that there's a big disconnect between us and the field in New York. There's a disconnect between what Arusha calls for us to do and what the Security Council or the Secretariat thinks we should be doing. There's a disconnect on our rules of engagement. There's a disconnect on our concept of operations. And they're basically telling us, no, you can't do this. This was incredibly frustrating because basically our hands were being tied behind our backs, and it was frustrated. Dallaire was frustrated. The whole gang of them were frustrated. And for the next 3 months, there's you can see in the reports where Dallaire's doing summary reports from time to time, he's asking for authority to do what we now relabel deterrent operations. Because the word offensive that was used at one point, that word offensive has got them worried. So you're not authorized to use offensive force. You're a peacekeeping mission. Okay, fine, deterrent. Deterrent that will deter the weapons from being used against us.
Despite clearly stated rights afforded to any people within the UN, which were listed in Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Tutsi people were still targets of genocide due to their ethnicity. The United Nations failed to take meaningful action on the values it publicly prioritized, undermining its credibility and effectiveness in addressing global challenges such as the Rwandan genocide. The UN finally saw the truth of what happened during the genocide when a group of Tutsi and Hutu banded together to form the Rwandan Patriotic Front and fought back to end this horror. After seeing their mistake, the UN began to help bring the thousands of murderers to justice. However, nothing will ever make up for the thousands of men, women, and children that were killed in cold blood. Since the Rwandan genocide, the UN has continued to make more legislation to help protect people. They have incorporated laws that target genocides and give the UN further power to intercede when it happens. In 2014, the former president of the Security Council during the Rwandan genocide, Colin Keating, advocated for enhanced preventative diplomacy, quick preventative deployment, and robust deterrence. He failed during the Rwandan genocide and experienced firsthand the effect of it on Rwanda and the surrounding countries. Keating ended this meeting with the suggestion that the cost of investing in such mechanisms would be insignificant when set alongside the dreadful human, political, and financial cost of inaction. In spite of these promises, many genocides are still occurring today. One such example is in China. The Chinese government is targeting the Uyghurs, a Muslim people group who are being forced into concentration camps and having multiple horrors performed on them. This genocide has been going on for far longer than the 100 days of the Rwandan genocide, and it is still not being addressed. However, instead of just standing by, doing nothing, such as what happened in Rwanda, in 2019, 37 countries in the UN wrote a declaration of support for China, claiming that China was protecting their country from terrorism, separatism, and religious extremism. Later, when even more information was revealed showing the depth of the genocide against the Uyghurs, they still continued to claim China's innocence. The UN has continued to turn their backs on this genocide just as they ignore the Rwandan genocide, in spite of the many pleas for help, photographic evidence, and testimonies of the Uyghurs. They have continued to ignore their promises to uphold basic human rights, to be able to live in one's country without fear of being killed by their government. If dismissal of suffering within the UN and the international community is not addressed, more preventable genocides are likely to occur again with the same kind of horrors that happened in Rwanda.